Please, marry my mum. A girl interrupts an Arab billionaire's lunch, and then his life shifts. Before we continue, please comment on which part of the world you are watching from. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble floors of Le Bernardin, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. Adil Al-Mansouri sat alone at his reserved corner table, the same one he occupied every Tuesday at precisely 1:00 p.m. The 42-year-old Arab billionaire's dark eyes scanned the latest property acquisition reports, while his untouched lobster bisque grew cold. Success had built walls around him, higher than any skyscraper in his vast real estate empire. The restaurant buzzed with the whispered conversations of New York's elite, but Adil remained an island of solitude. His tailored Armani suit, worth more than most people's annual salary, couldn't fill the emptiness that had consumed him since his parents' death 5 years ago. Money had become both his shield and his prison. Suddenly, the hushed atmosphere shattered like expensive china hitting marble. A small figure burst through the restaurant's heavy glass doors, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. Security moved to intercept, but 6-year-old Grace Thompson was faster than her poverty-stricken appearance suggested. "Please," she cried, her voice cutting through the ambient conversations like a knife through silk. "Please, marry my mom." The entire restaurant fell silent. 50 pairs of eyes turned to witness this unprecedented breach of Manhattan's social fortress. Grace stood before Adil's table, her small chest heaving from running, her cotton dress patched but clean, her eyes blazing with a determination that belonged to someone 3 times her age. Adil looked up from his reports, his expression shifting from annoyance to bewilderment. In his world of calculated business deals and strategic partnerships, nothing had prepared him for this moment. The little girl's desperate plea hung in the air like a challenge to everything he thought he knew about life. This was the moment that would crack the foundation of his carefully constructed world, though neither Grace nor Adil could have imagined the transformation that lay ahead. The silence stretched across Le Bernardin like a taut wire ready to snap. Adil's dark eyes fixed on the small girl standing before him, her defiant chin raised, despite the tears threatening to spill down her dirt-smudged cheeks. Around them, Manhattan's elite sat frozen in their seats, champagne flutes halfway to their lips, witnessing something that would become Upper East Side legend. "Security!" barked the maitre d', his face flushed with embarrassment. 2 imposing men in black suits moved toward Grace, but Adil raised his hand, stopping them mid-stride. "Wait!" His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms and bending city councils to his will. Grace's eyes widened. She hadn't expected the scary man in the expensive suit to speak directly to her. Adil studied the child with the same intensity he reserved for billion-dollar deals. Her clothes were clean, but clearly second-hand. Her shoes worn but carefully maintained. Most striking were her eyes, a brilliant green that held more wisdom and pain than any 6-year-old should possess. "What did you say?" Adil asked, his Arabic accent softening his words slightly. Grace swallowed hard, her small hands clenching into fists at her sides. "I said please marry my mum. She works really hard. And we need help. And—" Her voice cracked, but she pushed forward, "and I heard that rich people can fix everything." A collective gasp rippled through the restaurant. Someone's fork clattered against their plate. Adil felt something strange twist in his chest, an emotion he hadn't experienced in years. When was the last time someone had spoken to him with such raw honesty? In his world, every conversation was filtered through lawyers, assistants, and carefully crafted agendas. "Who is your mother?" he heard himself asking, though he couldn't explain why he cared. "Her name is Sarah," Grace said, standing straighter. "Sarah Thompson. She cleans your buildings. She works at the Al-Mansouri Tower every night after her day job at the grocery store. She's really pretty, and she makes the best pancakes, and she never complains even when her feet hurt real bad." Adil's breath caught. The Al-Mansouri Tower was his flagship property, a gleaming monument to his success that dominated the Manhattan skyline. Hundreds of people worked in that building, but he'd never paid attention to the cleaning staff who maintained its pristine appearance. They were invisible to him, just another line item in his operating expenses. "And why?" Adil said carefully. "Do you think I should marry your mother?" Grace's lower lip trembled, but her voice remained steady. "Or because we're going to lose our apartment, and Grandma Rose is sick, and Mama cries at night when she thinks I'm sleeping. She needs someone to take care of her for once, instead of her taking care of everyone else." The raw pain in the child's voice hit Adil like a physical blow. Around them, the restaurant had transformed into a theatre, with every patron straining to hear this extraordinary exchange. But Adil found himself forgetting the audience entirely, drawn into the orbit of this brave little girl who had somehow invaded his fortress of solitude. "How did you find me here?" he asked. Grace's cheeks reddened slightly. "I followed you. I've been watching your building, trying to figure out how to talk to you. You always leave at the same time and you always come here. I had to wait until I had enough money for the subway." The revelation that this 6-year-old had been conducting surveillance on him should have been alarming, but instead, Adil found himself oddly impressed by her determination and resourcefulness. "Grace!" a breathless voice called from the restaurant entrance. A woman with honey-blonde hair and exhausted blue eyes rushed through the doors, her face pale with panic. She wore the uniform of a grocery store clerk, and Adil could see the family resemblance immediately. The same stubborn chin, the same fierce protectiveness blazing in her eyes. "Gracie, what are you doing here? Oh God, I'm so sorry," Sarah Thompson said, reaching for her daughter while addressing Adil with the kind of mortified deference reserved for encounters with the impossibly wealthy. "I'll pay for any disruption she's caused. Please don't call the police." As Adil watched mother and daughter together, something fundamental shifted inside his chest. The woman's obvious love for her child, her dignity despite her circumstances, the way she instinctively positioned herself between Grace and potential threat. It awakened something in him that had been dormant for too long. For the first time in years, Adil al-Mansouri was genuinely curious about someone else's story. "Please don't take her away," Sarah whispered, her arms wrapping protectively around Grace. The fear in her voice was palpable, not fear of embarrassment, but the deeper terror of a mother who had already lost too much and couldn't bear to lose more. Adil remained seated, his business mind automatically cataloguing details. The woman's gentle but firm grip on her daughter, the way she unconsciously shielded Grace from the staring crowd, the careful way she spoke despite her obvious exhaustion. Sarah Thompson possessed a quiet strength that commanded his respect in a way that boardroom posturing never could. "Mama, I was trying to help," Grace said, her voice small but unapologetic. "Like you always help everyone else." "Oh, sweetheart." Sarah's voice broke slightly as she knelt to Grace's level, smoothing her daughter's unruly curls. "You can't just walk up to strangers and—" "I'm not a stranger," Adil interrupted, surprising himself with the words. Both mother and daughter looked up at him, confusion evident in their identical green eyes. "Your daughter is correct. You do work in my building." Sarah's face went white. "Mr. al-Mansouri, oh God. Grace, what have you done?" The terror in her voice cut through Adil like a blade. When was the last time someone had feared losing their job because of something he might do? When had he become the kind of man that hard-working people trembled before? "Please," Sarah continued, standing slowly, "I know this is unforgivable, but Grace doesn't understand." "What I understand," Adil said quietly, "is that your daughter has shown more courage in the last 10 minutes than most adults show in a lifetime." He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sit." Sarah hesitated, clearly torn between the impulse to flee and the impossibility of refusing a direct order from someone who controlled her livelihood. Grace, however, had no such reservations. "See, Mama, I told you he was nice." Grace scrambled onto the chair, leaving Sarah little choice but to reluctantly take the seat beside her daughter. The restaurant's attention had become suffocating. Adil caught the maitre d's eye and nodded toward the private dining room. Within moments, they were relocated to a smaller, more intimate space where the weight of 100 stairs no longer pressed down on them. "Just now," Adil said once they were settled, "tell me about your grandmother." Sarah's composure finally cracked. "Sir, I really don't think—" "Grandma Rose has sugar diabetes," Grace interrupted, her 6-year-old vocabulary struggling with the complexity of the disease. "The medicine costs lots of money, and insurance doesn't pay for all of it. Mama works 2 jobs, but it's not enough. And now the doctor says Grandma needs special care and we can't afford—" "Grace, honey, stop," Sarah said gently but firmly. "Mr. al-Mansouri doesn't need to hear about our problems." But Adil found that he did need to hear about them. For years, he'd viewed poverty as an abstract concept, a distant social issue discussed in charity galas, where writing a check assuaged conscience without requiring genuine engagement. Sitting across from Sarah and Grace, he was confronted with the human reality behind the statistics. "How long have you been working at my building?" he asked. 3 years, Sarah answered quietly. "Night shift, Monday through Friday. I clean floors 16 through 20. 20 floors. His personal office was on the 20th floor. This woman had been maintaining his workspace for 3 years, and he'd never even seen her face. And the grocery store. Morning shift, Tuesday through Sunday." Sarah's voice carried no self-pity, just the matter-of-fact tone of someone describing an immutable reality. "Grace goes to my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, after school. She's very kind to watch her for free." Adil did the math quickly. Sarah worked 6 days a week at the grocery store and 5 nights cleaning his building. When did she sleep? When did she spend time with her daughter? "Mama is the hardest working person in the whole world," Grace announced proudly, reaching over to pat her mother's hand. "She reads me stories even when she's really tired, and she makes my lunch look like fun shapes, and she never misses my school plays even though she has to ask for time off." The love between mother and daughter was so pure, so uncomplicated, that it made Adil's chest ache. When was the last time someone had spoken about him with such unconditional adoration? His own parents had died before he'd achieved his success, taking with them the last people who had loved him for something other than his wealth. "The apartment," Adil said carefully. "Grace mentioned you might lose it." Sarah's jaw tightened. "That's not your concern, Mr. Al-Mansouri." "Actually," he said softly, "I think it might be." For the first time since entering the restaurant, he truly looked at the woman across from him. Despite her exhaustion, despite the worry lines etched around her eyes, Sarah Thompson was beautiful. But more than that, she possessed something he'd forgotten existed: genuine goodness. Here was a woman who worked herself to exhaustion for her family, who maintained her dignity despite desperate circumstances, who had raised a daughter brave enough to fight for her loved ones. Grace had asked him to marry her mother, but as Adil sat in that private dining room, he began to wonder if perhaps he needed them more than they needed him. The afternoon sun slanted through the restaurant's tall windows, casting long shadows across the private dining room as an uncomfortable silence settled over the unlikely trio. Sarah kept glancing toward the door, her body language screaming her desire to escape this surreal situation, while Grace swung her legs from the oversized chair, studying Adil with the unblinking intensity that only children possessed. "Mr. Al-Mansouri," Sarah began, her voice strained with the effort to remain professional, "I appreciate your patience with Grace's interruption, but we really should go. You must have important meetings." "Cancel them," Adil said simply, pulling out his phone. Sarah's eyes widened as he spoke rapid Arabic to his assistant, rescheduling what she could only assume were multi-million-dollar deals. "There! Now I have time." "Time for what?" Sarah asked, bewilderment creeping into her voice. "To understand," Adil replied, leaning back in his chair and studying them both. "Grace has made me a proposition. In my business, I never dismiss a proposal without proper consideration." Grace beamed at being taken seriously, while Sarah looked like she wanted to sink through the marble floor. "Sir, she's 6 years old. She doesn't understand." "She understands that her family is in crisis," Adil interrupted gently. "Thus, she understands that traditional solutions aren't working, and she understands that sometimes unconventional problems require unconventional solutions." He turned to Grace, his expression serious but kind. "Tell me more about your grandmother, Grace. What kind of care does she need?" Grace's face lit up at being asked a direct question. "Grandma Rose used to be a nurse, you know. She worked at the big hospital and helped lots of people get better. But now her body doesn't make the right kind of sugar. And her feet hurt really bad. And sometimes she gets confused and forgets things." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, pain flickering across her features. "She has diabetic neuropathy and early-stage dementia. The medications help, but she needs more supervision than I can provide while working. Adult daycare would be ideal, but it costs $1,500 a month." Adil processed this information with the same analytical approach he applied to market fluctuations and zoning regulations. $1,500, less than he spent on a single dinner at some restaurants. For him, it was pocket change. For Sarah Thompson, it was impossible. "And your apartment," he pressed. Sarah's shoulders tensed. "The rent was raised. Significantly. I've been trying to negotiate with the landlord." "But—" She trailed off, unwilling to voice the inevitable conclusion. "How much is the increase?" $800, Sarah whispered. Starting next month, Grace piped up helpfully. Mama cries when she looks at the bills. She thinks I don't see, but I do. She tries to hide it in the bathroom. Grace. Sarah's cheeks flamed red, but Adil was grateful for the child's honesty. It painted a picture he was beginning to understand. A woman drowning quietly, maintaining dignity while her world crumbled around her, protecting her daughter from the full weight of their circumstances. "What kind of work did you do before?" Adil asked. "Before the cleaning and the grocery store." Sarah hesitated, then answered quietly, "I was a pediatric nurse. I worked at Mount Sinai Children's Hospital." This revelation hit Adil like a physical blow. A pediatric nurse, someone whose life had been dedicated to healing children, now cleaning floors and stocking shelves to survive. "What happened?" "My husband died in a car accident 3 years ago," Sarah said, her voice carefully controlled. "Ryan was our primary income. He had excellent insurance, a good pension plan. When he died, the life insurance barely covered the funeral and outstanding debts. I had to take Grace out of private school, sell our house, move in with my mother. Then Mom got sick and medical bills." She shrugged helplessly. "I couldn't maintain my nursing license while working multiple jobs and caring for a grieving child and an ill parent. Everything just collapsed." The stark efficiency of tragedy struck Adil silent. One moment of bad luck, a drunk driver, a moment of inattention, had destroyed an entire family's stability. Sarah had fallen from middle-class security into poverty through no fault of her own, and the system offered no safety net adequate to catch her. Grace reached over and squeezed her mother's hand. "Mama saved a little boy once," she announced proudly. "Before Daddy died. Tommy Martinez had leukemia, and Mama took care of him every day for months until he got better. His mom still sends us Christmas cards." Adil watched Sarah's face soften at the memory, saw the flicker of the woman she had been before life battered her down. A healer, a professional, someone who had dedicated her life to caring for the most vulnerable. "You want to go back to nursing?" he observed. Sarah's smile was bitter. Wanting and being able to are very different things, Mr. Al-Mansouri. Nursing requires energy, focus, emotional availability. When you're working 18-hour days just to pay rent, there's nothing left over for dreams. "What if there was?" Adil asked quietly. Both mother and daughter looked at him with confusion. "What if," he continued, his voice gaining strength as an idea began to form, "the practical barriers were removed? What if Grace's proposal wasn't as impossible as it sounds?" Sarah's face went pale. "Mr. Al-Mansouri, I don't know what you're suggesting, but—" "I'm suggesting," Adil said, leaning forward, "that perhaps Grace sees something that adults have been trained to dismiss. She sees a problem and proposes a solution. In business, we call that innovation." Grace clapped her hands excitedly. "See, Mama, I told you he was smart." But Sarah was shaking her head vigorously. "No, absolutely not. This is insane. You don't know us. We're complete strangers. The idea that you would even consider—" "What do you see when you look at me?" Adil interrupted. The question caught Sarah off guard. What? What do you see? Money? Power? Success?" Sarah studied his face carefully before answering. "I see loneliness," she said softly. "I see someone who has everything and nothing at the same time." Her words hit their mark with devastating accuracy. Adil felt something crack inside his chest, some carefully constructed wall crumbling under the weight of simple truth. "You're right," he admitted. "I have accumulated more wealth than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I own buildings that touch the clouds and businesses that span continents, but I eat dinner alone every night. I haven't had a genuine conversation with another human being in years. I can't remember the last time someone hugged me." Grace's eyes widened with the boundless empathy of childhood. "That's really sad," she whispered. "Grace," Sarah warned, but Adil shook his head. "She's right. It is sad. And maybe—" He paused, the words feeling strange on his tongue. "Maybe your daughter's proposal isn't as crazy as it sounds. Maybe we all have something the others need." Sarah stared at him as if he'd grown a second head. "You're talking about marriage, Mr. Al-Mansouri, not a business transaction. What if it could be both?" Adil asked. "What if there was a way to solve your family's immediate crisis while giving me something I've been missing without even realizing it?" The silence that followed was deafening. Grace looked between the two adults with growing excitement, while Sarah appeared to be fighting an internal battle between desperate hope and rational disbelief. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. What exactly are you proposing? The question hung in the air like smoke, dense and impossible to ignore. Adil realized that for the first time in years, he was about to venture into uncharted territory without market research, legal consultation, or risk assessment. He was about to speak from his heart instead of his head. A partnership, he said carefully. A marriage of convenience that serves both our needs, but one built on mutual respect and genuine benefit rather than exploitation. Sarah's laugh was hollow. Mr. Al-Mansuri, this isn't a Jane Austen novel. This is real life. You can't just marry someone to solve their problems. Why not? The question came from Grace, who had been following the conversation with rapt attention. Mama, you always say that good people help each other. Mr. Adil is good people, aren't you, Mr. Adil? The casual use of his first name should have felt presumptuous from a 6-year-old, but instead it warmed something deep in Adil's chest. When was the last time anyone had called him simply by his name, without titles or honorifics? I'd like to think so, he told Grace seriously. And you're right about good people helping each other. Your mother has been helping me for 3 years by making sure my building is clean and welcoming. Now maybe I can help her. This is insane, Sarah muttered, but there was less conviction in her voice than before. Adil pressed his advantage. Is it more insane than watching your family fall apart when there's a simple solution available? Is it more insane than working yourself to death while your mother deteriorates and your daughter grows up thinking poverty is normal? Sarah flinched at his words, but he continued relentlessly. I'm proposing a legal marriage with separate living arrangements initially. You would have full access to my health insurance, which would cover your mother's care completely. I would provide housing, not charity, but as part of our agreement, you could return to school, update your nursing credentials, rebuild your career. Grace would have educational opportunities, stability, security. And what do you get out of this arrangement? Sarah asked, her tone sharp with suspicion. Adil was quiet for a long moment, considering his words. I get to remember what it feels like to be human, he said finally. I get to be part of a family again. I get to make a difference in someone's life that matters more than stock prices or property values. He turned to Grace, who was listening with the wide-eyed fascination of a child watching magic unfold. And I get to know this remarkable little girl who was brave enough to march into the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan and demand that I help her family. Grace beamed at the praise, but Sarah remained skeptical. You're talking about disrupting your entire life for complete strangers. That's not rational behavior for a successful businessman. You're right, Adil acknowledged. It's not rational, but maybe that's exactly why it's the right thing to do. He leaned forward, his voice gaining intensity. Sarah, for the past 10 years, every decision I've made has been rational. Every relationship I've maintained has been strategic. Every friendship has been calculated for advantage. Do you know what that's gotten me? A penthouse apartment that echoes with silence and a life so empty that I didn't realize how hollow it was until a 6-year-old girl forced me to look at it. Sarah's expression softened slightly, but wariness remained in her eyes. I'm not asking you to love me, Adil continued. I'm not even asking you to live with me immediately. I'm proposing a practical arrangement that gives your family immediate relief while allowing us to build something real over time, if that's what develops naturally. What about children? Sarah asked suddenly. What if you want children of your own someday? Adil glanced at Grace, who was coloring on her napkin with a crayon that had mysteriously appeared from her pocket. I'd be honored to be Grace's stepfather, if she'd have me. As for other children, he paused. That would be something to discuss if our arrangement evolved into something more personal. Grace looked up from her artwork, a crayon drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands in front of what appeared to be a very tall building. I would like a little brother or sister, she announced, but only if they're nice and don't pull my hair. Sarah's face flushed crimson. Grace, but Adil laughed, a genuine, surprised sound that echoed strangely in the private dining room. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed spontaneously at something innocent and sweet. We're getting ahead of ourselves, he said gently. The immediate question is whether this arrangement could work in principle. Sarah, you would maintain complete autonomy. Separate bedrooms, separate lives initially. You would be free to return to nursing, to rebuild your independence. If after a year or 2 you decide this isn't working, we could arrange an amicable divorce with a settlement that ensures your family's continued security. Sarah stared at him for a long moment, conflict playing across her features. Why? She asked finally. Really? Why would you do this for us? Adil considered the question seriously. Because Grace asked me to, he said simply. And because in asking, she showed me something I'd forgotten existed. She showed me that sometimes the most important problems don't require complex solutions. They just require someone willing to care. He gestured to the restaurant around them, to the world of wealth and privilege beyond its walls. I can buy anything, Sarah. Anything except the one thing Grace has in abundance. The ability to love unconditionally and believe in goodness without cynicism. Your daughter spent her subway money to find me because she believed I could help her family. How could I prove her wrong? Grace slid her napkin drawing across the table to Adil. This is us, she explained. That's you, that's Mama, that's me, and that's your big building where we'll be safe. Adil studied the simple drawing with more attention than he'd given most business proposals. 3 stick figures, holding hands, smiling. It was the most valuable piece of art he'd ever received. May I keep this? He asked Grace solemnly. She nodded enthusiastically. It's a present. Mama says presents show people you care about them. Adil carefully folded the napkin and placed it in his jacket pocket wound next to his heart. Thank you, Grace. It's the most beautiful present anyone has ever given me. Sarah watched this exchange with growing emotion, seeing her daughter's innocent gesture met with genuine appreciation rather than condescending adult tolerance. You really mean this, she said quietly. You're actually serious about this arrangement. Completely serious, Adil confirmed. But I understand if you need time to consider it. This isn't a decision that should be made lightly. How much time? Grace piped up. Because the landlord wants the extra money next week, and Grandma Rose has a doctor appointment on Thursday, Pecans, and Grace, honey, Sarah interrupted gently, but Adil held up a hand. Grace is right to be concerned about timing, he said. If you're willing to consider this seriously, I could have my lawyers draft a preliminary agreement by tomorrow. Nothing binding, just a framework for discussion. Meanwhile, I could advance funds to cover your immediate expenses, the rent increase, your mother's medical bills. You would do that without any guarantee that I'll agree to this? Sarah asked, incredulous. I would do that because Grace asked me to help her family, and I have the power to help. Everything else is secondary. Sarah sat in stunned silence, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling with emotion. I need to think. I need to talk to my mother, to consider what this would mean for Grace. For all of us. Of course, Adil agreed. But while you're thinking, let me ask you one question. If this arrangement could give you back your career, your independence, and your family's security, what would be worth more? Maintaining pride or building a future? It was the question that would haunt Sarah Thompson through the sleepless night ahead, as she wrestled with the decision that could change everything. The ride home from Manhattan to their cramped Queens apartment felt like traveling between 2 different worlds. Grace pressed her face against the subway window, chattering excitedly about the fancy restaurant with the sparkly lights and Mr. Adil who's going to help us, while Sarah sat in stunned silence, her mind reeling from the afternoon's surreal events. She kept replaying Adil's words, searching for hidden motives or cruel intentions, but found only a sincerity that terrified her more than any deception could have. Men like Adil al-Mansouri didn't involve themselves with people like her. It simply didn't happen in the real world. Yet here she was, carrying his business card and a promise that seemed too good to be true. Their apartment building loomed before them, its faded brick exterior and broken front steps a stark reminder of their reality. Mrs. Chen from 3B was watering plants on her fire escape and waved as they climbed the stairs. The familiar sounds of their building embraced them, babies crying, televisions blaring in multiple languages, the perpetual drip of the third-floor bathroom leak that the landlord refused to fix. Grandma Rose, Grace burst through their apartment door, her voice carrying the pure joy of a child sharing wonderful news. Mama found us a daddy. Well, I found him, but Mama talked to him, and he's really nice and he has a really tall building. Sarah's mother, Rose Thompson, looked up from her position on the worn couch where she'd been sorting pills into a weekly medication organizer. At 68, Rose still possessed traces of the beauty that had made her a popular nurse 40 years ago, but diabetes and encroaching dementia had carved deep lines around her eyes and left her movements careful and deliberate. "What's this now?" Rose asked, her voice carrying the slight confusion that had become more frequent lately. Sarah sank into the threadbare armchair across from her mother, suddenly feeling the weight of exhaustion that adrenaline had held at bay. Grace interrupted a billionaire's lunch today and asked him to marry me. Rose blinked slowly, processing this information. Well, she said finally, that's not something you hear every day. What did he say? He said yes, Grace announced triumphantly, climbing onto the couch beside her grandmother. He's going to help us pay for your medicine and everything. Grace, honey, it's not that simple, Sarah began, but Rose held up a weathered hand. Tell me about this man, Rose said to Sarah, her nurse's instincts cutting through the fog of confusion to focus on what mattered. Sarah found herself describing Adil al-Mansouri, his unexpected patience with Grace, his genuine curiosity about their situation, the careful way he'd avoided making her feel like a charity case. As she spoke, she watched her mother's face for signs of judgment or concern, but found instead a surprising thoughtfulness. He owns the building where you work, Rose asked. The whole company, Al-Mansouri Properties, they own half of Manhattan. Rose nodded slowly. And he offered to help us without wanting anything in return. Not exactly nothing, Sarah admitted. He talked about loneliness, about wanting to be part of a family again. He said it would be a partnership, not charity. Mama, show her the picture, Grace exclaimed, and Sarah reluctantly pulled out the business card, where Adil had written his personal phone number on the back. Rose studied the card with the methodical attention she'd once given to patient charts. Al-Mansouri, she murmured. I remember reading about him in the newspaper. His parents died in some kind of accident, didn't they? I don't know the details, Sarah said, but he mentioned being alone. And you said he seemed genuine, not like he was trying to take advantage. Sarah considered the question carefully. Mum, I've spent the last 3 years cleaning his building. I know rich men. I know how they treat service staff, how they look through us like we're invisible. Adil wasn't like that. When he looked at Grace, he really saw her. When he listened to our problems, he wasn't just being polite. Rose was quiet for several minutes, watching Grace color in a coloring book with crayons worn down to stubs. Finally, she spoke. Sarah, honey, I need to tell you something. The doctor called while you were out. Sarah's blood ran cold. What did he say? My kidneys are getting worse. The diabetes is progressing faster than we hoped. Rose's voice was steady, but Sarah could see the fear in her eyes. He wants to start dialysis within the next month. The room seemed to tilt around Sarah. Dialysis meant 3 days a week at the clinic. It meant transportation costs, time off work, specialized care. It meant expenses that were already impossible becoming completely insurmountable. How much? Sarah whispered. Even with Medicare, we're looking at about $3,000 a month in out-of-pocket costs, plus the fact that I'll need help getting to and from treatments. Grace had stopped coloring and was looking between the two women with growing alarm. Mama, is Grandma Rose going to be okay? Sarah forced a smile she didn't feel. Of course, sweetheart. We'll figure it out. But as Grace returned to her coloring, Rose caught Sarah's eye and shook her head almost imperceptibly. They both knew the truth. There was no way to figure this out, not with their current resources. This man, Rose said quietly. What kind of marriage was he proposing? Sarah explained Adil's terms. Separate living spaces, no physical expectations, access to health insurance, financial security, while she rebuilt her nursing career. Rose listened without interruption, her expression growing more thoughtful with each detail. It sounds too good to be true, Rose said finally. That's what I thought too. But sometimes, Rose continued, when you're drowning, you don't question the life preserver that gets thrown to you. You grab it and swim for shore. Sarah looked at her mother in surprise. Sass, are you suggesting I should consider this? I'm suggesting that pride is a luxury we can't afford, Rose said bluntly. Grace needs stability. I need medical care that we can't provide. And you need a chance to rebuild your life instead of slowly grinding yourself into dust. But marriage, Mom. Marriage to a complete stranger. Your father and I met on a blind date, Rose reminded her gently. We barely knew each other when we got engaged 6 weeks later. Sometimes the heart knows things the mind hasn't figured out yet. This isn't about love, though. It's about survival. Maybe, Rose agreed. But I watched this man's face when Grace was talking about us. And you said yourself that he seemed lonely. Maybe love isn't where it starts, but that doesn't mean it's not where it could end up. Grace suddenly looked up from her coloring book. Are we really going to go live with Mr. Adil? Sarah's heart clenched at the hope in her daughter's voice. I don't know yet, sweetheart. It's a big decision. But he was really nice, Grace insisted. And he kept my picture. And he said I was brave. Nobody ever calls me brave except you and Grandma Rose. You are brave, Sarah said, pulling Grace into her arms. The bravest little girl I know. So we should help him not be lonely, right? Like he's going to help us not be scared about money. The simplicity of 6-year-old logic cut straight to the heart of the matter. Grace saw a lonely man and a struggling family who could help each other. She didn't see social barriers or economic disparities or the 1,000 complications that adult minds automatically conjured. That night, after Grace had fallen asleep in their shared bed and Rose had retired to the small bedroom they'd converted for her medical needs, Sarah sat at their tiny kitchen table with Adil's business card in front of her. The numbers on her latest bills seemed to mock her from their place beneath a refrigerator magnet. Rent increase notice, medical bills, Grace's school fees, utility warnings. She thought about her daughter's fearless march into that restaurant, driven by love and desperation and the unshakable belief that good people help each other. She thought about Adil's surprised laughter when Grace announced her desire for siblings, the careful way he'd treated a child's crayon drawing like precious art. Most of all, she thought about the alternative, watching her mother deteriorate without proper care, losing their apartment, disrupting Grace's schooling again, spiraling deeper into a poverty that felt increasingly inescapable. At 2 a.m., Sarah Thompson picked up her phone and dialed Adil Al-Mansouri's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice alert despite the hour. "Sarah, I want to discuss the details," she said simply. "When can we meet?" The next morning dawned grey and drizzling, matching Sarah's mood as she dropped Grace at school and made her way to the gleaming towers of Midtown Manhattan. She'd barely slept after her 2 a.m. phone call with Adil, and every rational part of her mind screamed that she was making a terrible mistake. Yet here she was, riding the elevator to the 42nd floor of the Al-Mansouri Tower, about to negotiate the terms of a marriage to a man she'd known for less than 24 hours. Adil's office occupied the entire top floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city sprawling below. Sarah had cleaned these windows countless times in the pre-dawn hours, but she'd never seen the space in daylight, never appreciated the way sunlight transformed glass and steel into something almost magical. Adil rose from behind a desk that probably cost more than she made in 6 months, but his expression was warm rather than intimidating. He'd traded yesterday's formal suit for dark jeans and a white button-down shirt, making him appear younger and more approachable. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing toward a seating area that featured comfortable sofas rather than imposing conference furniture. "Can I offer you coffee? Something to eat?" Sarah shook her head, too nervous to consume anything. "I need to understand exactly what you're proposing before I can make any decisions." "Of course." Adil settled across from her, his posture relaxed but attentive. "I've had my legal team draft a preliminary agreement, nothing binding, just a framework for discussion." He handed her a thick folder that Sarah accepted with trembling hands. The document was written in surprisingly clear language, free from the legal jargon she'd expected. "The basic structure is this," Adil explained as she scanned the pages. "A marriage contract with specific terms and protections for both parties. You and Grace would move into the penthouse apartment in my building, not with me, but into a separate unit I maintain for guests. 3 bedrooms, fully furnished, with access to building amenities." Sarah's eyes widened as she read the details. The apartment he was describing was larger than any home she'd ever lived in, including the house she'd lost after Ryan's death. "Health insurance would begin immediately," Adil continued. "Full family coverage through my corporate plan, which includes experimental treatments and unlimited specialist consultations. Your mother's dialysis would be completely covered, along with any additional care she might need." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as the magnitude of relief this represented. No more choosing between groceries and medication. No more lying awake, calculating which bills could be delayed another month. "Educational trust for Grace," Adil read from his own copy. "College fund, private school if desired, tutoring, extracurricular activities. I want her to have every opportunity to develop her obviously considerable intelligence." "You barely know her," Sarah protested weakly. "I know she's brilliant, brave, and compassionate." "That's enough." Sarah continued reading, her amazement growing with each section. "A stipend for personal expenses." "Adil, this is too much. It's not charity," he said firmly. "It's partnership. You'll be contributing significantly to my life. Companionship, family connection, social partnership for business events if you're willing. The financial arrangements reflect the value of that contribution. But what about physical expectations? Sarah asked, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. Adil's expression grew serious. The contract explicitly states that all physical intimacy must be mutually desired and freely given. I'm not buying a wife, Sarah. I'm proposing a partnership that could potentially evolve into something deeper if we both choose that path. Sarah felt some of her tension ease, and if it doesn't evolve, if we discover we're incompatible, then, after 2 years, we part as friends. You'll receive a settlement that ensures your family's continued security, enough to maintain your lifestyle and your mother's care without needing to depend on anyone else. The generosity was staggering, almost incomprehensible. Why? Sarah whispered. Why would you give up so much for people you barely know? Adil was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the city beyond the windows. Because yesterday, for the first time in years, I felt like I mattered to someone. Not my money, not my influence, me. Grace saw past all of this, he gestured to the opulent office, and decided I was someone worth asking for help. She believed I was good enough to be part of her family. He turned back to Sarah, vulnerability clear in his dark eyes. Do you know how long it's been since someone believed in my goodness rather than my bank account? Sarah felt her last defenses crumbling. This wasn't a business transaction disguised as marriage. It was two wounded people finding unexpected hope in each other's company. There's something else, Adil said, reaching for another document. I've taken the liberty of researching nursing license reinstatement in New York. With your experience and education, you could be working again within 6 months if you wanted to. I could arrange for the continuing education credits you need, plus interview connections at the best hospitals in the city. Sarah stared at him in shock. You investigated my nursing background? I wanted to understand what you'd lost when your life fell apart. Sarah, you were an exceptional pediatric nurse. Your former supervisor at Mount Sinai still speaks glowingly about your skills and dedication. You didn't just lose a job when your husband died. You lost your calling. Tears spilled over Sarah's cheeks. No one had understood that before. Everyone saw her cleaning jobs and grocery store work as honest employment, never recognizing that she grieved daily for the profession that had defined her identity. I could go back to nursing, she whispered. You could go back to saving children's lives, Adil confirmed. Isn't that worth considering an unconventional marriage arrangement? Sarah wiped her eyes, struggling to process the enormity of what was being offered. What would you tell people? Your friends, business associates. They'll ask questions about our relationship. I'll tell them the truth, that I met an extraordinary woman and her remarkable daughter, and I was smart enough to recognize that they would make my life infinitely better. The details are no one else's business. And Grace, how do we explain this to a 6-year-old? Adil smiled at this question. I think Grace understands the situation better than either of us. Children don't overcomplicate things the way adults do. She saw a problem and proposed a solution. Now her solution is being implemented. Sarah laughed despite her tears. You make it sound so simple. Maybe it is simple. Maybe we're the ones making it complicated. Sarah looked around the office once more, trying to imagine herself belonging in this world of power and privilege. It seemed impossible, yet Adil was offering to build a bridge between their vastly different lives. I need one more night to think, she said finally. To talk with my mother again, to make sure I'm not letting desperation cloud my judgment. Of course, Adil agreed. But Sarah, don't let fear disguised as prudence rob you of an opportunity to change your family's entire future. As Sarah rode the elevator down from the 42nd floor, Adil's words echoed in her mind. By the time she reached the street, she realized she'd already made her decision. Now she just needed the courage to follow through. That evening, as she tucked Grace into bed, her daughter asked the question that would seal their fate. Mama, do you think Mr. Adil is lonely because he doesn't have anyone to tuck him in at night? Looking into her daughter's compassionate eyes, Sarah Thompson finally understood that sometimes the most logical thing to do was to follow your heart. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in the marble-floored lobby of the Al-Mansouri Tower, surrounded by boxes containing the entirety of their previous life. Grace pressed against her side, eyes wide with wonder at the crystal chandeliers and polished brass fixtures that transformed the building's entrance into something resembling a palace. Is this really where we're going to live, Mama? Grace whispered, her voice echoing in the vast space. "This is really where we're going to live," Sarah confirmed, still struggling to believe it herself. The past 3 weeks had passed in a whirlwind of legal paperwork, medical appointments, and careful conversations with Grace about their new living situation. True to his word, Adil had handled everything with efficiency and discretion. Rose's dialysis treatments had begun immediately, covered completely by his insurance. The rent crisis had evaporated overnight. Grace's school had been notified that her family circumstances had stabilized. Most surprisingly, Adil had insisted on spending time with them before the marriage, joining them for dinner twice and taking Grace to Central Park one Saturday afternoon. Sarah had watched nervously as her daughter chatted away to this powerful man, but Grace's natural warmth had quickly melted any awkwardness. By their third meeting, Grace was calling him Uncle Adil and insisting he push her on the swings. Mrs. Thompson, a distinguished man in an expensive suit, approached them. "I'm James Morrison, Mr. Al-Mansouri's building manager. He's asked me to show you to your new home." Sarah nodded, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. The marriage ceremony had been held that morning in a simple civil service, witnessed only by Rose and Adil's lawyer. It had felt surreal but not unpleasant, more like signing an important contract than beginning a lifetime commitment. Adil had been gentle and respectful, making no demands beyond the legal requirements. The elevator rose smoothly to the 38th floor, where Morrison led them down a hallway lined with artwork that Sarah was certain cost more than most people's houses. He stopped before a door marked 38B and handed Sarah an elegant key card. "Your new home," he said with a smile that seemed genuinely warm rather than professional. Sarah's breath caught as the door opened to reveal an apartment that belonged in magazines rather than real life. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Central Park, while hardwood floors gleamed beneath carefully chosen furnishings that somehow managed to feel both expensive and welcoming. 3 bedrooms, Morrison explained as they toured the space. "The master suite for you, a bedroom for Grace that Mr. Al-Mansouri had specifically designed for a young girl, and a 3rd room for your mother when she's ready to join you." Grace had already discovered her new bedroom and was squealing with delight. Sarah followed the sound to find a space that looked like something from a fairy tale. Soft pink walls, a canopy bed with white curtains, and shelves lined with books and toys that were clearly brand new. "Did Mr. Adil pick all this out?" Grace asked, spinning in the middle of the room. "He did," Morrison confirmed. He spent considerable time researching what a 6-year-old girl might enjoy. Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. Adil had thought about Grace's happiness with the same attention he probably gave to multi-million-dollar deals. "The kitchen is fully stocked," Morrison continued as they returned to the main living area. "Mr. Al-Mansouri wasn't sure about your preferences, so he provided variety. There's also a meal service available if you prefer not to cook." Sarah nodded mutely, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness evident in every detail. This wasn't just expensive housing, it was a home created specifically for their needs and comfort. "Where does Mr. Adil live?" Grace asked innocently. "The penthouse," Morrison replied, 2 floors up, "but he's asked me to assure you that your privacy will be completely respected. He won't visit unless specifically invited." After Morrison left, Sarah and Grace stood in their new living room, surrounded by luxury that felt both wonderful and intimidating. Rose was scheduled to join them the following day, once her current medication cycle was complete. "It's really pretty, Mama," Grace said softly, curling up in Sarah's lap on the plush sofa. "But it feels kinda big." "It does feel big," Sarah agreed, understanding her daughter's hesitation. They'd never had this much space before, never lived anywhere that didn't echo with the sounds of neighbors and street traffic. "Do you think Mr. Adil is sad up there by himself?" Grace asked, pointing toward the ceiling. Before Sarah could answer, there was a soft knock at the door. Sarah opened it to find Adil standing in the hallway, looking unexpectedly uncertain. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said. "Finally wanted to make sure you were settling in comfortably." "Uncle Adil," Grace bounded over and hugged his legs enthusiastically. "Come see my room. It's like a princess castle." Sarah watched as Adil allowed himself to be dragged through the apartment by her excited daughter. His formal demeanor softened completely around Grace, revealing glimpses of the man he might have been before life taught him to guard his heart so carefully. "It's beautiful," Sarah told him when Grace finally paused her tour. "Everything is perfect. Thank you." "I'm glad you approve," Adil said, but she could see uncertainty in his eyes. "I realize this must feel overwhelming. If you need anything changed—" "No changes," Sarah said firmly. "You've been incredibly thoughtful." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, two adults trying to navigate the strange territory of their new relationship. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" Sarah asked impulsively. "I was going to make pasta, nothing fancy, but I would like that very much," Adil said, his relief evident. As Sarah moved around the beautiful kitchen, preparing a simple meal while Grace showed Adil her new toys, she began to see glimpses of what their future might hold. Adil listened to Grace's chatter with genuine interest, asking questions about her favorite books and helping her arrange stuffed animals on her new shelves. When Grace insisted he needed to test the softness of her new bed, he obediently sat on the edge while she bounced beside him, explaining the relative merits of various pillows. Watching them together, Sarah felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't just a business arrangement anymore. It was the beginning of something that might actually resemble a family. Over dinner, they talked about practical matters, school schedules, Rose's medical appointments, Sarah's plans to begin studying for nursing license reinstatement. But underneath the logistics, Sarah sensed a growing comfort between them. Adil asked thoughtful questions about Grace's interests and Sarah's career goals. Grace regaled him with detailed accounts of her favorite playground games and her opinion on various vegetables. "I don't like Brussels sprouts," Grace announced solemnly, "but Mama says I have to try them anyway because that's how we discover new things we might like." "That's very wise advice," Adil agreed seriously. "I don't like Brussels sprouts either, but I keep trying them every few years in case my taste has changed." "See, Mama, even billionaires don't like Brussels sprouts." Sarah laughed, and was surprised to hear Adil's genuine laughter joining hers. For a moment, they felt like any ordinary family sharing a meal and debating vegetable preferences. After Grace was tucked into her new bed with a story read by both adults taking turns, Sarah and Adil found themselves alone in the living room, the city lights twinkling beyond the massive windows. "She's remarkable," Adil said softly. "You've raised an extraordinary child." "She likes you," Sarah observed. "That's not something that happens easily. Grace is usually shy around new people. She's not shy around me because she sees me as someone who can help her family. Children are remarkably practical when it comes to alliances." "Is that what this is?" Sarah asked. "An alliance?" Adil considered the question carefully. "I think it's the beginning of something neither of us expected. 3 weeks ago, if someone had told me I'd be reading bedtime stories to a 6-year-old, I'd have thought they were insane. And now I understand why Grace was so determined to find help for her family. She was protecting something precious." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both processing the magnitude of the changes in their lives. "Thank you," Sarah said finally, "for all of this, for believing in Grace's crazy plan, for giving us a chance at a real future." "Thank you," Adil replied, "for letting me be part of that future." As Sarah prepared for her first night in her new bedroom, she realized that Grace's impulsive proposal had accomplished something none of them had anticipated. It had begun healing wounds they hadn't even realized they carried. 6 months later, Sarah hardly recognized her own life. She sat in the break room of Mount Sinai Children's Hospital, wearing scrubs that still felt miraculous after months of cleaning uniforms and grocery store aprons. Her nursing license had been reinstated 2 weeks ago, and she'd been hired immediately into the pediatric intensive care unit, the same department where she'd worked before Ryan's death. "Dr. Martinez wants to see you in room 314, her colleague Jessica announced, poking her head into the break room. "The new admission with the respiratory complications." Sarah nodded, checking her watch. She'd be able to pick up Grace from her new private school by 4 p.m. Then they'd visit Rose at the specialized care facility where she now received round-the-clock attention between dialysis treatments. It was a routine that felt both familiar and miraculous. She was back to saving children's lives, while her own family finally had the security and care they deserved. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Grace had needed time to adjust to her new school and the sophisticated social dynamics of children from wealthy families. Rose had initially resisted the luxury of professional medical care, insisting she didn't want to be a burden. Sarah herself had struggled with imposter syndrome, feeling like she was playing dress-up in a life that belonged to someone else. But Adil had been patient and supportive through every adjustment. He'd helped Grace with homework when Sarah worked late shifts. He'd visited Rose regularly, bringing flowers and engaging her in conversations about her nursing career before memory loss claimed those experiences. Most surprisingly, he'd become genuinely invested in Sarah's return to nursing, celebrating small victories like her first successful IV insertion after months away from clinical practice. Their relationship had evolved gradually from polite coexistence to genuine friendship. They shared meals several times a week, either in Sarah's apartment or occasionally in Adil's penthouse, when Grace begged to see his indoor garden, a stunning rooftop terrace filled with plants from around the world. They attended Grace's school events together, presenting a united front that helped their daughter navigate her new social environment. Sarah, Dr. Martinez, appeared beside her as she reviewed charts. Good work with the Henderson case. The family specifically requested you for their daughter's care team. Sarah felt a flush of professional pride. It had taken months to rebuild her clinical confidence, but moments like these reminded her why she'd fallen in love with nursing in the first place. Thank you, Dr. Martinez. Emma's responding well to the new treatment protocol. Keep up the good work. Oh, and Sarah, your husband called. Something about Grace's parent-teacher conference being moved to tomorrow. Sarah's cheeks warmed slightly. The hospital staff had naturally assumed she and Adil were a traditional married couple, and neither had bothered to correct the misconception. It was easier than explaining their unusual arrangement, and lately the pretense felt less like pretense and more like possibility. I'll call him back during my break, Sarah said, surprised by how natural it felt to refer to Adil as her husband. That evening, Sarah found Adil in his penthouse study, working on his laptop, while Grace colored at the coffee table nearby. The domestic scene struck her with unexpected warmth. When had they begun gravitating toward each other's company so naturally? How was your day? Adil asked, looking up with genuine interest. Good, challenging case. But the family was grateful. Sarah settled into the chair across from him, accepting the glass of wine he offered. Grace, how was school? Mrs. Peterson says I'm reading above grade level, Grace announced proudly, and Tommy invited me to his birthday party at the zoo. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Sarah caught Adil's eye and saw her own pride reflected there. Grace had blossomed in her new environment, her natural intelligence finally receiving the support and challenge it deserved. Speaking of school, Adil said, I spoke with Mrs. Peterson today about the parent-teacher conference. She mentioned that Grace has been talking about wanting to learn Arabic. Sarah looked at her daughter in surprise. Arabic? Why Arabic, honey? Grace shrugged with 6-year-old nonchalance. Because Uncle Adil speaks it, and it sounds pretty. Plus, Mrs. Peterson says being bilingual makes you smarter. It does, Adil confirmed, clearly pleased. I'd be happy to teach you, if your mother approves. I think that's a wonderful idea, Sarah said, touched by Adil's obvious delight at the prospect of sharing his heritage with Grace. Later, after Grace had been tucked into bed with her usual routine of stories, read in both English and now simple Arabic phrases, Sarah and Adil lingered on his terrace, the city spreading out below them like a carpet of lights. She asked me something interesting today, Adil said, swirling the wine in his glass. Grace asks a lot of interesting things. Which one? She asked if I was going to be her daddy for real, or just for pretend. Sarah's breath caught. What did you tell her? I told her that depended on whether her mother wanted me to be her daddy for real. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Sarah felt her heart racing as she processed what Adil was really saying. Adil, I know this wasn't what we originally planned, he continued, his voice soft but determined. I know we agreed to keep things practical, separate, but somewhere in the last 6 months, this stopped being an arrangement and started being a life, a real life, with real feelings and real possibilities. Sarah stared at him, seeing vulnerability in his expression that he'd never shown before. I love her, Sarah, he said simply. I love Grace like she's my own daughter, and He paused, gathering courage. I think I'm falling in love with you too. The admission hung in the night air between them. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she recognized the truth she'd been afraid to acknowledge, even to herself. I feel it too, she whispered. This thing that's been growing between us. I didn't want to admit it because it wasn't part of our agreement, but feelings don't follow contracts. Adil finished gently. Sarah nodded, unable to speak around the emotion clogging her throat. Adil moved closer, reaching out to cup her face gently. Sarah, would you consider making this marriage real? Not just on paper, but in every way that matters. Looking into his dark eyes, Sarah saw the man who had patiently taught Grace Arabic phrases, who visited her mother every week and listened to stories he'd heard dozens of times, who had celebrated every small victory in her return to nursing as if it were his own achievement. "Yes," she breathed, and felt her heart expand as Adil's face lit up with joy. When he kissed her, soft and sweet under the Manhattan stars, Sarah realized that sometimes the most unexpected journeys led to the most perfect destinations. Grace's desperate plea in an exclusive restaurant had saved more than their family's future. It had given them all something they hadn't even known they were looking for, a love worth fighting for, built on a foundation of mutual respect, shared values, and the unshakable belief that good people help each other. As they held each other on the terrace, Sarah Thompson Al-Mansouri understood that some fairy tales began not with princes and princesses, but with brave little girls who refused to accept that happy endings were impossible. 1 year later, what should have been the happiest day of Sarah's life nearly became her worst nightmare. She stood in the bridal suite of the Plaza Hotel, adjusting her wedding dress, a stunning creation of ivory silk and delicate lace that Adil had insisted on purchasing for their real wedding ceremony. Today, they would renew their vows in front of friends and family, transforming their practical arrangement into a celebration of genuine love. Grace twirled nearby in her flower girl dress, chattering excitedly about her important role in the ceremony, while Rose sat in her wheelchair, looking more alert and healthy than she had in years thanks to the excellent medical care she now received. "Mama, you look like a princess," Grace announced. But her enthusiasm was interrupted by Sarah's phone buzzing urgently. Sarah glanced at the screen and felt her blood freeze. The caller ID showed Mount Sinai Hospital, her workplace, calling on what should have been her day off. "Dr. Martinez," Sarah answered hesitantly. "Sarah, I'm sorry to call you today, but we have an emergency situation. Multiple vehicle accident and several critical pediatric cases coming in. I know it's your wedding day. But how many children?" Sarah asked, her nursing instincts immediately overriding everything else. "7 so far, ages 4 to 12, 3 in critical condition. Sarah, I wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate, but you're the best pediatric trauma nurse we have." Sarah closed her eyes, torn between the life she'd built and the calling that defined her. Through the suite's windows, she could see the guests gathering in the hotel's grand ballroom, Adil's business associates, her nursing colleagues, neighbors who had become friends. 200 people waiting to witness their love story. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Sarah said without hesitation. "Mama," Grace protested as Sarah began changing out of her wedding dress. "You can't leave. It's your wedding day." "Sweetheart, there are hurt children who need help," Sarah explained, pulling on the spare scrubs she always kept in her car. "Sometimes being a nurse means making hard choices." Rose wheeled closer, her eyes sharp with understanding. "Go," she said firmly. "Those babies need you. True love waits." Sarah kissed her mother and daughter quickly, then rushed toward the elevator, her heart breaking at Grace's confused tears. She burst into the ballroom where guests were taking their seats, scanning desperately for Adil. He stood at the altar in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, speaking quietly with the officiant. When he saw her approaching in scrubs instead of her wedding dress, his face went through a rapid series of emotions: confusion, concern, and then understanding. "There's been an accident," Sarah said breathlessly as she reached him. "Multiple children in trauma. They need me at the hospital." The ballroom had gone quiet. 200 guests straining to hear this unprecedented development. Sarah was acutely aware of the murmurs beginning to ripple through the crowd, the shocked faces of people who had traveled from around the country to witness this ceremony. Adil looked at her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Sarah felt her heart sink, certain he would ask her to stay, to choose him over her profession just this once. Instead, he began removing his tuxedo jacket. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked in bewilderment. "I'm coming with you," Adil said simply, loosening his tie. "Grace, run upstairs and get my casual clothes from the suite." "Adil, no," Sarah protested. "This is our wedding day. These people came here for us. Your business associates, the mayor, will understand that my wife is needed elsewhere," Adil interrupted firmly. He turned to address their shocked guests, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's acoustics. "Ladies and gentlemen, my wife has just been called to the hospital to help save children's lives. Our celebration will have to wait, because today we're reminded that some things are more important than parties, even wedding parties." The silence stretched for a heartbeat, then erupted into spontaneous applause. Sarah felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched their guests rise to their feet, supporting a decision that prioritized service over celebration. 20 minutes later, Sarah burst through the emergency room doors with Adil close behind. The scene that greeted them was controlled chaos, medical teams working frantically over small, broken bodies while parents wept in corners. "Thank God you're here," Dr. Martinez said, handing Sarah a chart. Emma Rodriguez, age 7. Internal bleeding and possible spinal injury. Room 3. Sarah fell immediately into the focused rhythm of trauma nursing, her world narrowing to vital signs and treatment protocols. She was vaguely aware of Adil speaking quietly with parents in the waiting area, offering comfort and practical help, but her attention remained laser-focused on the children who needed her skills. For 6 hours, she worked without break, moving from one critical case to another. When she finally emerged from the last surgery, exhausted but victorious, she found Adil exactly where she'd left him, in the waiting area, now surrounded by grateful families whose children had been saved. "All 7 are stable," Sarah announced to the room. "The surgeries went well, and we expect full recoveries for everyone." The celebration that erupted in that hospital waiting room was more meaningful than any wedding reception could have been. Parents hugged Sarah with tears of gratitude, while Adil watched with pride that made her heart soar. Later, as they finally returned to the Plaza Hotel in the early hours of the morning, Sarah felt overwhelmed with exhaustion and emotion. "I'm sorry," she said, as they rode the elevator to their suite. "I ruined our perfect day." Adil took her hands gently, his eyes bright with an emotion she'd never seen before. "Sarah, do you know what I thought when you walked into that ballroom in scrubs instead of your wedding dress?" She shook her head, afraid to hear his answer. "I thought, this is why I love her. This is why I want to spend my life with this woman. You chose to save children's lives over your own wedding day. You chose service over celebration, duty over personal happiness. That's not ruining our perfect day. That's proving beyond any doubt that I'm marrying exactly the right person." As the elevator doors opened to reveal Grace and Rose waiting in the hallway, Grace now in pajamas but still wearing her flower crown, Sarah realized that their love story had always been about more than romance. It was about 2 people who had found in each other the perfect partner for building something meaningful. "Besides," Adil added with a smile, "here we have the rest of our lives for celebrations. Tonight, 7 families get to go home with their children because of you. That's the best wedding gift I could ever receive." Standing in that hotel hallway at 3 a.m., still in surgical scrubs, surrounded by the family they had built together, Sarah Thompson Al-Mansouri understood that some love stories were written not in candlelight and roses, but in hospital corridors and shared values, in the courage to choose what matters most when the world is watching. 5 years later, Sarah stood at the window of their penthouse home, watching the sunrise paint Manhattan's skyline in shades of gold and pink. In her arms, she held 18-month-old Layla Al-Mansouri, whose dark curls and bright green eyes perfectly blended her parents' features. The baby babbled contentedly in a mixture of English and Arabic, reaching chubby fingers toward the light dancing across the glass. "Mama," Grace's voice called from the kitchen, now deeper with the confidence of an 11-year-old who spoke 3 languages fluently and tutored younger children in mathematics. "Dad's making his famous pancakes, but he says he needs your expert opinion on the blueberry distribution." Sarah smiled, still marveling at how naturally Grace called Adil Dad. Now, the adoption had been finalized 3 years ago, on Grace's 8th birthday, in a ceremony that meant more to all of them than any legal proceeding had a right to mean. "Coming, sweetheart," Sarah called back, but paused for one more moment to appreciate the view. Not the cityscape, though it remained breathtaking, but the life they had built together in this space that had once felt impossibly grand and now simply felt like home. The past 5 years had brought changes none of them could have anticipated. Sarah had been promoted to head pediatric nurse at Mount Sinai, leading a department that had become renowned for its innovative trauma protocols. Adil had shifted his business focus toward developing affordable housing initiatives, partnering with city agencies to create opportunities for families like the Thompsons once were. Together, they had established the Grace Foundation, providing emergency assistance to single parents facing medical or financial crises. Rose had lived to see Layla's birth, holding her newest granddaughter with hands that shook from age, but eyes that remained sharp with love. Her passing 6 months ago had been peaceful, surrounded by the family she had helped bring together. Grace still left flowers on her grandmother's grave every Sunday, telling her about school achievements and Arabic lessons, and her plans to become a doctor, who helped both people and their families. "There's my favorite girls," Adil said, as Sarah entered the kitchen, Layla immediately reaching for her father with delighted squeals. He lifted both wife and daughter into his arms, spinning them gently while Grace giggled at their silliness. "Perfect timing," Grace announced importantly. "The pancakes are ready, and I've prepared a full report on today's schedule. Parent-teacher conferences at 2 p.m., Layla's pediatrician appointment at 4 p.m., and dinner with the Martinez family at 6 p.m. because it's the anniversary of Emma's surgery." Sarah exchanged amused glances with Adil. Grace had inherited her father's organizational skills, along with his determination to take care of everyone around her. "What would we do without our family coordinator?" Adil asked solemnly, settling Layla into her high chair, while Grace beamed with pride. As they shared breakfast on the terrace overlooking Central Park, Sarah reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun as Grace's desperate attempt to save her family had evolved into something none of them could have imagined, a love story that had transformed not just their lives, but the lives of countless others they had been able to help along the way. "Mama," Grace said suddenly, syrup-sticky fingers reaching across the table to touch Sarah's hand, "I was thinking about something Mrs. Peterson said yesterday." "What's that, sweetheart?" "She said that sometimes the best things happen when you're brave enough to ask for help. And I was thinking, maybe that's not just true for kids. Maybe grown-ups need to be brave like that too." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she looked at her daughter, no longer the desperate 6-year-old who had burst into an exclusive restaurant, but still possessing the same courage and wisdom that had saved them all. "You're absolutely right," Sarah said softly. "Being brave enough to ask for help, and being brave enough to say yes when help is offered." Adil reached over to squeeze Sarah's free hand, his eyes warm with the love that had grown stronger with each passing year, each shared challenge, each moment of ordinary happiness. "To brave little girls," he said, raising his coffee cup in a toast, "who teach adults that sometimes the most impossible dreams are just waiting for someone courageous enough to believe in them." As they clinked cups and glasses together, even Layla's sippy cup joining the celebration, Sarah understood that Grace's interruption of a billionaire's lunch had been more than a child's desperate plea. It had been the first step in a transformation that had touched not just their family, but their entire community. Love, it turned out, was indeed the most powerful force for change, capable of turning strangers into family and impossible dreams into beautiful reality. The little girl who had once asked a billionaire to marry her mother had grown into a young woman who understood that the greatest wealth was not measured in money, but in the connections we build and the lives we touch along the way. If this story of unexpected love and family transformation touched your heart, you're not alone. Millions of people around the world face the same struggles as Sarah's family, working multiple jobs while still unable to afford basic needs, watching loved ones suffer without adequate medical care, feeling trapped by circumstances beyond their control. But just like Grace showed us, sometimes the most powerful change begins with one person brave enough to ask for help and another person brave enough to say yes. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that impossible situations don't stay impossible forever. Like and follow for more stories that prove love, courage, and compassion can transform any life, because every family deserves their own happy ending. And sometimes it starts with one brave conversation. What would you do if a child interrupted your day with a desperate plea for help? Share your thoughts in the comments below.